Hello and welcome to my Woolly PhD. My name is Liz Scarf and this is a weekly vlog about what I'm currently learning and making in my anthropology PhD, all about wool, here in Iceland. So I'm down in the foreshore area of Reykjavik, and I thought I'll come down here and video because there's a really beautiful view of the mountains that you can have in the background. You see the mountains? Yeah. No, so the visibility's not so great today, but it's been quite a bit of effort, and it's a bit windy at times, so things might get blown over, but let's just see how we go. This is, Iceland for you, right? And this week I have been thinking about the concept of tradition a bit more. I think I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, so before I started this master's, I did a culture of Masters of Culture, Health and Medicine, hang on, there's going to be so many tech issues today. Anyway, it's quite cold. It was a Masters of Culture, Health and Medicine, so it's medical anthropology, and it had a particular focus on settler colonialism and racism and trauma. And I remember one of my teachers talking about the problem with calling Indigenous cultures traditional cultures. And she said that traditional cultures are cultures that don't exist anymore, but that if the culture exists today, it is a contemporary culture. So Indigenous cultures are contemporary cultures because they have survived, they respond to contemporary challenges and they evolve, they're not stuck in time. And I also learned about the sort of the colonial nature. Oh my God, my bag's blowing away. My computer's blowing away. Brief pause for the wind gust. The laptop screen's just like flat against the table now. At least it's not snowing. It was snowing before and I was thinking, I'm gonna have my laptop out in the snow. I don't know how wise this is. Anyway, I did all my data backups today, my final one, so all good. So I also sort of learned about how in academia, the colonial nature of academia, and that tends to equate tradition with primitive and therefore with stupid as well, right? So it's another reason why it's problematic to refer to Indigenous cultures as traditional cultures, as this language is associated with sort of colonial tropes of being less advanced, less civilised, less sophisticated. The concept of traditional also raises individual agency by portraying a culture or a people as simply carriers of custom rather than sort of active participants. And it also often romanticises, which is another way of saying that it erases many details about a culture, particularly those related to sort of structural oppression and disadvantage. I think I might just have to move this closer and so I can keep a hold on it. So then you can have absolutely no view. Should have just done this in the apartment. Anyway, don't want to romanticize a PhD in Iceland, my goodness. Anyway, it has got me thinking about the use of the word traditional when it comes to fibercraft practices and knitting, right? And this was somewhat prompted, if you saw it a few weeks ago, by the Game of Wool hoo-ha. And I have watched some of it now, and for the record, I like the show. But it is nothing compared to the show that is the knitting world's reaction to the show. I think there's a really interesting PhD in analysing that reaction, actually. But it's not mine, but it could be yours. Anyway, before I unpack it more though, I think it's important first to say one thing about words, which is words can have standardised definitions in dictionaries, right? Dictionaries, of course, are political artefacts in themselves, and cultural artefacts as well. But what tends to be more important is to consider the work that particular words are doing, right? So the way in which they are being used socially and politically in specific contexts. So what they're conveying in terms of information and relationship, but what is their usage making invisible, particularly? And also thinking about, why does one thing get labelled traditional, but not others, right? There are many enduring practices in a culture that never get kind of identified or named as a traditional practice, and then some that somehow do. So. And also just considering like who labels something traditional, right? Somebody comes along and says, this is a traditional practice. Are they an insider or an outsider to the culture? Why are they naming it? What's the benefit? Who's benefiting and who disadvantages from that naming practice? Excuse me. And And just because you use the term traditional in a particular way with a certain intent doesn't mean that that's how it's heard or understood, right? And all communication is basically on the receiver's terms, not on the sender's. So I think just a few little asides that I think are kind of important just to say, But back to the problems of the term traditional in the context of sort of knitting. This could be a super long video. There are so many ways in which this is problematic. But at the moment, I am mostly thinking about the ways in which it intersects with gender and class oppression. An erasure of, got to put my bag somewhere where it's, I'm just going to have to like hold it here. So first, thinking about whose knitting practices get labelled as traditional, right? They tended to be more middle class and more luxury items, and we see them preserved in museums. We don't see as many of the everyday items being labelled, so there is kind of a class preference. And also thinking about who selected and rejected knitting objects for commercial purposes, right? So a lot of traditional knitted garments, for instance, once used to be kind of important economic products, but somebody was deciding which products were important and which weren't. And these were often like the middleman, actually, right, like a broker, who was buying the knitted garments off women, or often trading it for goods. Actually, people wouldn't get paid in money. And now they were deciding what was valuable, what wasn't, and the standard and a whole range of things, and the price. And it's actually those things that have gone on to be traditional. And so this was women's labour, but the value of it was mostly being determined by women. And this is a lot of cultures. I know I'm speaking very generally here, but the reading I've been doing on it suggests there's a pattern across multiple cultures like this. So in terms of class and gender, in terms of lower class and women's labour erasure. Also, with knitting, hang on. So calling something traditional also naturalises it, right? So with knitting, it naturalises knitting as a practice, a thing that women do, rather than seeing it as skilled labour, right? So it's almost like women just know how to knit, were kind of born how to know it. They didn't work hard for years from around the age of 4 to get really, really good at it and really quick at it, which in a lot of kind of traditional knitting cultures, that's exactly what happened. Young children were doing fibre preparation, and then they were knitting from a very young age, and they were learning to spin as well. It took years for them to be able to sort of knit really well, and they would knit certain parts of a garment that were easier. The more skilled knitter in the family would knit the complex parts. So these are long, let's say, apprenticeships, right? Anyone who's tried knitting knows it actually takes years to get quite good at it. Anyway, so another thing that happens around traditional making practices, this happens in knitting too, right, is that if people do try to charge for the labour appropriately, they get accused of commercialising the tradition. As if someone's tradition is something that we should be able to get for free or for some kind of symbolic amount. So labour gets erased when the concept of traditional gets kind of overlaid, right? And in this way, women's work or knitting work can be culturally celebrated but economically devalued. So it's really, in Iceland, right, you can get Icelandic sweaters and you can get them made from a range of different materials, made in a range of different places and with different designs, and the structure of the sweater can be quite different. I've seen raglan sweaters being called it's a traditional Icelandic sweater. It's not, it's got to be a continuous yoke. Anyway, so there's a lot of people who visit who want the authentic Icelandic sweater, hand knit, by some lovely Icelandic grandmother, right? So, really kind of, they're really enjoying the stereotyping but then they balk at the price. Right, so they want the hand knit version, but then they're like, wow, it's really expensive. So the figures on this, right, so this is me just estimating based on sort of what I've seen around, and I have been around to a lot of shops and I have looked at a lot of knitwear, I have to say, so I don't think it's a bad estimation, right? So there's no minimum wage in Iceland like there is in some countries. Most wages are collectively bargained, but we could generally say 2,000 to 2,500 kroner per hour would be an approximation. So let's say a knitter takes 30 hours to make the sweater. That's a reasonably quick knitter. If they were paid at 2,000 kroner an hour, right, that's 60,000 kroner for the labour. And that's about $720 Australian. Generally, they retail for between 40 to 50,000 kroner. I have seen some higher. So that's less than the minimum wage for their labour. They pay for the wool too, right? They're not getting the wool for free. So they are being paid well below minimum wage anyway. And this is already a vast improvement on what they were being paid before they collectivised their knitting labour in the mid-1970s. So yeah, it's still an issue. God, my fingers are so cold. I'm gonna have to wrap this up. Okay. Also here, industrialisation and sort of tourism explosion both kind of led to a lot of machine knitted Loperpesa flooding the market at much lower prices, and machine knit offshore too, right? And this made a version of the sweaters more accessible to the tourist market and a local market, but I don't know how many local Icelanders buy machine knit in China, Loperpesa, maybe some, but it further depressed what hand knitters could charge, right? So women who'd relied on knitting for income found it, less able to compete with this industrial production. And the label traditional could get used on sort of hand knitted and machine knitted versions, and tourists often unable or unwilling, uninterested to distinguish between the two, right? So then in 2020, there was a legal designation made for what constitutes a Loperpesa. It can't be machine knit, and it has to be knit here, and it has to be Icelandic wool, right? And it has to be a yoke design. It's basically seamless. Anyway, so this was mostly to protect women's labour. And I'd say sort of more working class women's labour. And I think this is an interesting use to which the concept of traditional sort of has been used, right, is to really define what that is and put legal protections on it. So sweaters who are not made like that cannot be called a Loperpesa here. I don't know how well it's policed, but they legally can't be like, so people will call them, it's an Icelandic style, or it's an Icelandic sweater, right? If it doesn't meet the criteria, right? But the rise in factory production also meant that knitting skills, which were once economically necessary for survival, they've just become increasingly optional. This is kind of a global trend, of course. And so then these skills became traditional crafts rather than essential knowledge, right? And they were sort of further feminised and sentimentalised, positioned as nostalgic hobbies rather than sort of invaluable economic skills important for a family and community survival. And knitting, it already struggles with the stereotype of being very static, right? If we think about traditional as a way that tries to hold something in time. This idea that there's no more innovations to be made, which just many knitters and textile engineers will just know it's just not the case, right? And of course, there's a way knitting which is stereotyped as a labour of love or a cultural duty rather than a form of economic production. And, really highly skilled labour, actually. So anyway, there's a few thoughts to get your noggin cogitating on problems of the word tradition. Okay, and they bug me, of course, and I don't know if my PhD will go in this direction. It could. I'm that interested. But yeah, it's some of the ways in which the term traditional kind of gets operationalised against working class women, but then also an example of how they've actually been able to use that to push back. So yeah, feel free to add in the comments if there are other issues with the term that kind of get you razzed up, or thinking, okay, what have I been making? I have finished. Actually, I'm just going to close my computer because it's just flapping around in the wind. I even brought this down with me. I finished the Altheda sweater by Jennifer Steingass. Great pattern, Jennifer. It's so lovely. Oh, look. blowing in the wind. It is so lovely, and I cannot rave about Plutolope enough. I love it. I'm so tempted to go buy a bunch of plates to take home with me, but I have 0 inches in my luggage for anything else, so I can't. I have to do another trip. My next trip might be just a Plutolope trip. But anyway, but this is an absolute train wreck of a knit in terms of size. I messed up the size totally because I didn't swatch. I have never not swatched for a garment in my life. I banged on about this last video. You don't need to hear it again. And the ribbing. Anyway, but it is really lovely. And even after the first wash, it's already changed in its sort of texture and its feel. And so I get the feeling this is going to be a wool that really changes over time as you wear it. And I think I like that a lot, right? It sort of says, yeah, this is produced in a way where there's still a liveliness, and the wool still gets to assert its kind of agency and its character over time in relationship with the body. Whereas I think some of these very, superwash wools particularly, right, it's become very static, not static electricity, but fixed. And I don't know, there's less agency of the wool because some of the wool's core characteristics have been kind of chemically removed, actually, or denatured. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to how my daughter experiences this over time, and then looking forward to knitting some more myself when I come back next time. But highly recommend the pattern, very clear. And Jennifer Steingass has got some lovely Lopa Pacer. And she doesn't use the word, she uses Icelandic style or something like this. Good for her, good move. Yeah, and then I'm taking a 24-hour break from knitting. I am doing a jigsaw puzzle because I love jigsawing, and I have officially finished my field work for my first fieldwork trip. I'll do another 8 months of it over the next year and a half, but this first 4-month stint, I officially finished on Friday. I finished all my notes. So I'm now on holiday. I'm taking a month off, and that also means a month off the video. So this is the last one until early January. So yeah, if you're watching this around the end of the year, I hope you have a lovely end of the year, whatever that is for you. And yeah, thanks for watching and joining me on the journey. I really enjoy making these videos and the thinking process that it kind of makes me put in, and it actually is creating a really useful thinking container for me in my studies. So yeah, and it's really lovely to have people to sort of chat with about it, and your enthusiasm means a lot too, right? Because this is also hard work at times. Well, it's hard work most of the time, but at times I really feel like, it's hard work. And I feel a little bit cheered on from the comments and people watching. So I just want to say thanks and really appreciate that. Yeah, it's a team effort like most enterprises in life. Thanks for being on the team, and I will see you in the new year. Bye.